Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Todd Rundgren's Utopia by the band Utopia.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
You have been waiting for this one and I was waiting to deliver this review, so hopefully you like this one. This is of course Todd Rundgren's Utopia, a video that I am actually really wearisome of making because you guys voted this album to be on the list, and truth be told, what it usually means to me is that a lot of you like this album, and if I have strong opinions about it or if I don't actually execute the review in a way that is well thought out and actually well spoken, then you guys will notice it more than usual, so hopefully you'll enjoy this review and what I have to say about this one. Anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album.
To mind about what should be done and how much of the old will die, that the new may be begun.
So as I noted, you guys actually voted this album to be added onto the list, and of course I'm saying this as in like a hindsight sort of thing for people who weren't watching this channel whenever the voting actually took place, so yeah, just an FYI. And this album actually happened to be very popular with these guys, with only one album surpassing it in votes, and that is of course Traffic's The Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys, but this one also got a very substantial amount of votes from you. So let's try and get into the mind of this album, and by that we have to start understanding Utopia, but even further than that we have to start realizing the mind of one singular man, and that man is of course Todd Rundgren. So Rundgren was born on the 22nd of June 1948 in Philadelphia, and from a young age he would teach himself how to play the guitar, which much like guesses Steve Howe would make him form a very unique style of playing that would be personally characteristic of him, and the earlier incarnation of Led Zeppelin of course being the Yardbirds, and at the age of 17 he would form his first band alongside with his roommate and his roommate's brother called Money. Now Money didn't really go far in any direction, but in 1966 Rundgren would join a very well-known group in Philadelphia called Woody's Truck Shop, and in his time with them he would elevate the band to its most upper heights, becoming the most successful band in the entirety of Philadelphia. But only after a runtime of 8 months with the band, he and bassist Carson Von Austin would actually depart from the band to form their own group called Nas. And all of the members of Nas would actually work together as well as share living dorms together, and with this overflowing creative process, the band would release their first 3 albums from the year 1968 to 1969. And in that time, Rundgren would actually start experimenting with newer ideas that went out of the realm of the regular music such as pop music and of course the contemporary rock music as well. And especially he would be inspired by one record in particular, being Laura Nyro's 1968 release called Ellie and the 13th Confession. Now at that time something else would happen, and that would be the fact that Rundgren would kind of take leadership on Nas as well, and with being explorative in his musical styles he would change directions spends a lot of time within the band, and this alongside living together has caused many tensions within the band, which would ultimately resolve in the departure of both original members, being Rundgren himself and bassist Van Austin. Now in this point of the overview about his life, I'm gonna run through some things. So after leaving Nas, Rundgren would actually start work on two separate things, the one of course being producing because he did have a knack for it, and the second one is starting his own solo career, which actually proved to be quite successful, with him having several hit singles to his name. And throughout his earlier solo records, he would show even more signs of experimenting and going out of the usual pop rock realm, and that was both in the sound of his music as well as just testing the limits of vinyl itself. Now around 1972, Rundgren would record his fourth studio album called A Wizard, A True Star, and on that album you can actually find lyrics stating, "Wait another year, Utopia is here." And wouldn't you know it, a year afterwards in 1973, Rundgren would form yet another band, and this time it would be called Utopia. Well, actually the band wasn't really called Utopia at the start, and they were more like Todd Rundgren's Utopia because they were sort of an accompanying band to Todd Rundgren's project. But as time went on, Utopia would become its own band, of course also being spearheaded by Rundgren himself, who, as well as doing Utopia stuff, would still maintain his own solo career as well. But the reason for Utopia even existing in the first place and not just staying in the realms of the solo career by Todd himself is because Todd Rundgren decided that finally he was gonna go out of the pop rock realm and experiment into the realm of progressive rock. Now, along the years, we've seen many successful bands go ahead and dabble their way into the realm of progressive rock as well, but I don't believe, or at least I couldn't find any major artists that really went ahead and shifted their entire persona into the realm of progressive rock, much like what Todd Rundgren did with Utopia. And he was definitely inspired by progressive rock artists and bands, stating that ELP was a major influence on him, to the point where he wanted to recreate a lot of that keyboard sounds and synthesizer sounds that he brought forth not one, not two, but three keyboardists to be a part of Utopia. And while this was Todd's band, he definitely didn't show a lot of singularity, and while he would compose all of the tracks on here, he would let other members of Utopia to pitch in their own ideas and put them into the songs, and it definitely shows that this album is a collaborative effort. And alas, in 1974, Utopia would come out with their debut album, which is the one we're reviewing today, being called Todd Rundgren's Utopia by, of course, just Utopia. Now, this album, much like a lot of the other solo works made by Rundgren, would test the limits of vinyl. And when I say the limits of vinyl, I mean the physical limits of it, because this album would have a runtime of a full hour. Now this of course sounds remarkable, but then you start realizing that the way to achieve that would actually be a very strong compression on the entire audio track, which would cause a losing of actual audio quality. And this album opens up with a track called Utopia Theme. Now this one was actually originally just called Utopia, and it had like the saying in brackets next to it saying that it actually was a live recording, but I didn't know that going into this one. I just knew that it was called Utopia Theme, and honestly I heard the sound quality on here and I was like, yeah, this is probably the compression, and I didn't know that it was live. And then suddenly when people just started clapping and cheering and shouting, I kind of didn't really get why they put it into the recording. Like, it wasn't a really good compositional choice at least, and I wasn't really understanding that what I was listening to was a live recording. Now honestly, I am not entirely sure why they had to take this live recording from one of their USA shows instead of just putting the studio version of the same piece, but I guess it's fine. I guess it makes sense. The energies are high, but to me at least personally, listening to the Utopia theme, I found it to be pretty much a lackluster. One of those pieces that works really well in a live setting, but then you put it onto record form and it suddenly loses a lot of its charm. Now the next song on the album is called Freak Parade. Now this one is studio recorded much like the rest of this album from this point onwards, and while it does contain the same sort of trend as started off with the Utopia theme, it does delve more into the progressive side of things, sounding like it even somewhat inspired by Gentle Giant. Freedom Fighters is the third track on this album and the one that closes off the side 1 of this record. Now this one, there's really no way of beautifying this one. It is not a good track. It's just your average pop rock tune composed solely by Rundgren, and honestly I don't know what it's doing on here. It really doesn't have a place on this album, which tends to be very progressive in nature, and then suddenly you have this one which kind of raises questions on why even forming Utopia in the first place if you're gonna release music like this on this album. Now moving on, we then move to the side B of this album, which of course contains one piece which is 30 minutes in length. As I said, testing the limitations of vinyl is really what is done on here, and this piece is called The Icon, and to me at least this is the best thing to have come out of this album by a big margin. The Icon is a true prog epic, and it really shows how well Todd has taken everything that he's learned from listening to other progressive rock bands and implemented with his own musical knowledge. It sounds really good, as well as just having this very unique tinge of something that is slightly exotic and doesn't really sound like it originated in progressive rock itself. But I do have an issue with it, or I have an issue with it in the context of this entire album, because at least in my personal view, The Icon is the only reason why this album should really exist. Everything else outside of it doesn't feel as inspired or as meticulously crafted as this piece. This one is just great. It has a lot of segments into it. They flow seamlessly from one another. They sound really good. Everyone is shining on here. It's honestly such a good epic. So why have all the rest of the things when it definitely shows that they were not as well thought out as this one? Like honestly, the better resolution that this album could have gone down with is just having The Icon as the entirety of this album, maybe making it even a bit longer and splitting it into 2 parts, much like Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull, and then you can also really get a lot of time to explore progressive rock music in a way that it was supposed to be performed, as well as not losing the overall musical quality of the sound compression. But instead, the experience that this album really gave me was starting off with something that really doesn't meet the expectations that I had for this one, especially seeing as a lot of you voted this one as one of the best ones that I should add on the list, and then just ending it off with a really solid piece of progressive rock music. And switching the sides wouldn't really do a lot, because then I just start off with something really promising, really good, and then be let down in the second part of it, only to be left with a very sour taste in my mouth. So honestly, they should have just neglected anything else and made The Icon the centerpiece and the only piece of this entire album. But still, seeing as The Icon fills more than 50% of this entire album, I will rate it accordingly, because it does make a lot from this album be worth my time. But looking at it in its entirety, I'll probably only be coming back to the side 2 of this one, with forgetting side 1 in the near future. So this album cover, it's pretty cool. It was made by the Japanese designer and artist called Haru Miyachi, which is actually written as Maru Miyachi on Wikipedia, so they better fix that. And Miyachi has definitely dabbled a bit in creating album cover art, and Discogs lists 4 albums for which he made the album cover, but the most well-known one probably has to be this album for Utopia. And honestly, if you asked me, I really have no idea how you can represent this album's music in the cover forms, so the way that Miyachi decided to represent it with the very vibrant and colorful and slightly psychedelic tones on here is honestly the way that I'm gonna remember this album for. As I said again, don't know what's good to represent this album, so I guess this is just what I'll have to work with. So this album truly, as just a fair average, receives a rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be listening to Act 4 Rebirth and Reprise by The Deer Hunter. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay, Warren, Wrist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.